In October 2012, Marvel rebranded their entire line of comics under the Marvel Now banner, an era that would effectively last for 3 years until 2015's Secret Wars. It's a fan favorite era of comics under the editorial reign of Axel Alonso, with titles like Hawkeye, Superior Spider-Man, Thor, God of Thunder, and Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, among many, many others. 2022 marks the 10-year anniversary of Marvel Now, so at Comic Book Herald we'll be looking back at the best, most interesting, or just downright most confounding Marvel Now titles. This is Marvel Then. Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. Today we're going to be looking at Hawkeye by Matt Fraction, Aja, Annie Wu, Francisco Francavilla, and many others, looking at what made it so special. You can find links to all this good stuff, a Marvel Now reading order in the show notes. Spoilers for discussed comics will follow. And hey, if you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. It all helps me out a great deal. Hawkeye officially enters Marvel Now with issue number 6, running through issue 14 by the end of 2013, the last year Hawkeye published with any real consistency. It would take another 19 months for the final 8 issues to release. I'll look at this year-long stretch, primarily made up of Fraction, Aja, Hollingsworth, with Francisco Francavilla and Steve Lieber providing important fill-in art, and Annie Wu coming onto the team by year's end. The first 5 issues of Hawkeye had already made it one of the most critically acclaimed comics of 2012, with the tape story arc of issues 4 and 5 functioning as the most straightforward superhero story of the entire run. In the first 3 issues, Fraction, Aja, and Hollingsworth established the irreverence and style that would define and differentiate Hawkeye from Marvel's traditional superhero fare. The tagline that best sums up the run, though, is, "This is what he does when he's not being an Avenger." Before we talk about Clint, Barton, Kate Bishop, the Tracksuit Vampires, Lucky the Pizza Dog, Grills, Kingpin, Madame Mask, and all the characters that made Hawkeye so endearing, there's one piece of the comic that is more transcendent than any other: Aja and Matt Hollingsworth's storytelling and visual acuity. The first 2 pages of Hawkeye number 6 are a perfect encapsulation of how Aja's panel layout, narrative flow, and use of white space sets a uniquely defined tone for the entire series. Page 1 is split into a 5x6 template, but only 17 of the available 30 panels have defined borders. Simply put, it looks like nothing Marvel Comics published at the time, before, or since, really. Aja uses the hyper-decompressed pacing to super zoom on all elements in the scene. Fragments of Christmas ornaments, multicolored wires, a ticking clock, and Tony Stark and Clint Barton's desperately nervous faces. The absence of the big picture context indicates Clint is trying to stop a ticking time bomb. Fraction lets Aja work and calls back to issue 1's now famous opening, "Okay, this looks bad." He also perfectly summarizes his Clint, equal parts way out of his league and just dumb enough to confidently make the reckless, brave decisions the situation calls for. The only visual and caption in the entire left-hand column is, "Screw this," mirrored against the tangled wires. It always looks bad for Hawkeye, but F it, here goes nothing. It's basically the mantra for the book. The second page completely resolves the tension with the punchline. Clint's just trying to set up his TV, and he called flippin' Iron Man Tony Stark for tech support. It's a comedy wrapped in an artistic vision with more attention to detail than Clint Barton's ever paid to anything. Creatively, too, we can see in this issue within 2 pages how Fraction and Aja balance their skill sets. Fraction's humor is an absolutely essential element to make all this work. There are so many small moments, so many hangdog, woe is me scenes, with the borderline always rocking a concussion Clint taking his lumps. In Iron Man's Marvel Now series from this era, he travels to space to encounter the Phoenix and Regalian recorders. In Clint's series, he struggles with setting up his apartment because you have to make your stuff work. And in the hands of Fraction Aja, it's the latter that resonates with emotional depth and clarity. Even at its most capital A Avengers, Aja's take on Hawkeye number 6 never feels like a Big 2 superhero book. In a fight against AIM with Spider-Man and Wolverine, in which Clint is characteristically knocked out and concussed, the action plays like an arcade horizontal scroller. 12 panels arrayed in 10 different shapes, all set in front of the same bombed-out building. This is one of my favorite things about Hawkeye, because despite the way I'm celebrating its differences, Fraction and Aja and the team still aren't running from the superhero landscape of the Marvel Universe that Clint and Kate call home. Hawkeye isn't embarrassed to be a superhero comic. It just isn't the main focus. What's perhaps most incredible about Hawkeye is how it can almost completely remove the familiar inclusion of trick arrows and Avengers support and hone in on a growing cast of unique characters that are a part of Clint's apartment life. Hawkeye number 11, Pizza is My Business, starring Lucky the Pizza Dog, is a deserved Eisner winner and the go-to example of what Aja brought to the series that elevates it so far above the majority of comics from either of the big 2. Aja has an incredible feel for iconography as shorthand storytelling, the way he can give a dog's eye view of Brooklyn through the kinds of icons you'd see in the likes of Microsoft Office. The brilliance extends to the full creative team too. The only dialogue we can read contains words that dogs might generally understand or be familiar with. Lucky's POV is also colorblind or muted, since dogs are allegedly colorblind. Pizza's My Business works so well because in addition to its ambitious storytelling approach, Lucky's detective journey connects various elements of narrative that have been building or are to come in the run. Hawkeye's 2013 is all about Clint standing his ground in his Brooklyn apartment, despite the threat of the tracksuit Draculas and their organized crime ring. With Kate angrily urging him to be better, Clint decides to stand his ground and help the people in his apartment who need him, extending as far as helping a resident, Grills, protect his dad during Hurricane Sandy. Ultimately, the threat does come back, as a hired assassin, Kazi, murders Grills on the apartment rooftop. In Hawkeye number 11, Lucky discovers the body, overhears a fed-up Kate tell Clint she's moving to LA, and is around for the arrival of Clint's brother, Barney Barton. So Pizza's My Business functions as both an experimental comic and a multifunctional cog in an expanding story. But again, it's hard to say precisely how any of this would play outside of David Aja's sublime approach to story. The idiosyncratic nature of the style, the fact that it looks quite unlike anything in Marvel at the time, and the way this was embraced by readers, leaves one of the most influential legacies of any artist on any Marvel Comics of the entire millennium. This is still something that artists are aspiring to. While David Aja has been making excellent comics prior to Hawkeye, including a highly recommended run with Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction on Immortal Iron Fist, the Marvel Now series is a clear leap in confidence and willingness to experiment. You see the build to this ability over the course of Immortal Iron Fist, but it's not as developed, nor as free to let loose. To be clear, it's still very good, and a stellar fit for that book. When working in the superhero form, Aja's clearest reference point is the incredible David Mazzucchelli superhero work, known for all-time great books with Frank Miller like Daredevil Born Again and Batman Year One. This is often notable in Aja's lines and sense of pacing, but there are even page comparisons, like those made by Reddit user Zach is Crazy, that show an uncanny resemblance between particular layouts and structures. Nonetheless, by the time Aja's working on 3 Jacks in Daredevil number 500 with Ann Nesenti, for the record, this 2009 anniversary short story is a fantastic Daredevil deep cut, he's pretty clearly on the path to what would become Hawkeye. The story's title page is a cinematic overview of the dockside fair landscape, 10 uniquely sized panels blending zoomed-in shots of building fronts, a bullseye, and a single image of Daredevil's head smashing into a window, the lone bit of superheroics that are visible on the page. It's a more traditional layout too, but Aja also plays with broader white spaces here, using extended gutters to incorporate Daredevil reading heartbeats to suss out versions of the truth in the story. By the time we get to Hawkeye, the clearest comparison point for the visual style, at least that I'm aware of, is Chris Ware, particularly his 2000 critical darling Jimmy Corrigan, the smartest kid on earth. Few graphic novelists that I've read make as much use of scattered iconography displaying thoughts and elements of the landscape. Ware's also never met a page he couldn't dissect into 34,000 panels, really slowing down the reading experience and forcing concentration on the motion of what's happening, on character facial expressions, and on what is being said beat by beat by beat. Ware's influence is clear, although I certainly would stop short of any nefarious accusations of shoplifting style. Aja and Ware are very different storytellers, and what I like so much about David Aja's take on these visual tricks is his ability to weave them into substantially more populous storylines and beats. Where Ware's style often evokes the utter sadness of life, Aja's is poppy and retrofitted to a dog that loves pizza and a goofball who likes his bow and arrow an awful lot. One of the most common criticisms I've seen towards this run from longtime Marvel fans is that Fraction, Aja, and Hollingsworth's Clint Barton doesn't feel like the familiar version of the longtime Avenger. That Hawkeye is a cool comic and all, but it isn't really a Hawkeye comic. Is it? On the surface, I can definitely see why this might be. Hawkeye's a hot-headed former criminal. In his debut, he fights Iron Man, who over the course of 4 decades comes to really value and understand leadership in the Avengers, despite his antagonism towards the likes of Captain America in his earliest days with the team. This is a character who has not only gone on to found the West Coast Avengers, but during the Korvac saga saves the entire team, including Iron Man and Thor, from the Elder, the Cosmic Elder, the Collector. It's shown time and time again that Hawkeye earns his stripes with the Avengers and can hold his own. So the sad sack Charlie Brown Clint, who seems more likely to wind up bludgeoned in a dumpster than conquering a cosmic supervillain, may rub some the wrong way. But one of the things I love most about Hawkeye is all the ways it absolutely engages with this question. It makes a real effort to maintain the legacy of Hawkeye, even as it redefines it for a new generation. The most obvious continuation is through Clint as a regular guy hero, and at times even akin to the Robin Hood of Brooklyn for his apartment complex. Clint drives with Grills through a literal hurricane to help the man save his father and at least try to salvage some memories before the home is flooded, right? These are the types of heroics that we expect from street-level Marvel characters like Spider-Man or Daredevil. More broadly, Clint protects his apartment building from the predatory tracksuit Draculas, although again, it must be said that Kate Bishop deserves a majority of the credit for this. This is a purposefully small-stakes mission. Protect a building full of people from predatory landlords that escalates with superhero undertones as the tracksuits are connected to the larger crime families of the Marvel Universe and players like Madame Mask and the Kingpin. And while it's less altruistically motivated, and more because he's thinking with his favorite trick arrow, Clint tries to help an apparent damsel in distress, the elusive Cherry, when she comes to him in need of protection. He beats up a whole strip club full of tracksuits for her. What a hero. Hawkeye's always been one of the horniest Avengers, and early in his avenging, even one of the most toxically sexist. As the character developed into Marvel's 1980s, Clint's calling card shifted to the Avengers' resident doomed Lothario, except unlike Tony Stark, who occupies a similar space, Clint seems to almost exclusively date and or marry superheroes. Annie Wu joins for some amazing full-page romance comic illustrations with Hawkeye number 8 as Clint's gallery of former flames, Black Widow, Mockingbird, and his at-the-time almost girlfriend Spider-Woman step in to save the big idiot from himself. For my money, Fraction and the team capture Clint perfectly, surrounded by gorgeous, brilliant, strong women and stepping in it every time he opens his mouth or does anything. Clint Barton's history with women is, to put it bluntly, real bad. He's easily manipulated by Natasha when she's at her cold warriest. He has an incredibly dark and nasty turn on Mockingbird after she's sexually assaulted, and over the course of these issues, he clearly betrays and hurts Jessica Drew. Even Cherry, the new femme fatale Clint's fallen for, is playing him for her own gains, a fact that all Clint's former lovers can see before Clint has any kind of clue himself. Which brings us to the next piece of the Hawkeye legacy, the part where Clint is in way over his head. This is perhaps the most controversial for longtime Avengers fans because, again, in a lot of ways, this one boils down to the cliched MCU argument that it's pretty weird. There's a regular-ass dude with a bow and arrow on a team with a super soldier, a super spy, an Iron Man, a god, and a Hulk. For fans who've seen Clint hold his own in the Kree-Skrull War, the Korvac Saga, and the duration of West Coast Avengers, watching him get beat up by the broiest bros this side of Broston can feel like a declaration that your favorite superhero sucks. I don't think that's the intent, though. Clint is a regular guy, and in that, he's one of the few Avengers who can plausibly get the snot beaten out of him on an off day. Thor doesn't get tricked into helping a woman rob a strip club only to get arrested when the police don't recognize him. Clint does that. That works. The reality of Hawkeye the Avenger is that we don't see him on his own very often, and as a run, Hawkeye is considering how vulnerable he really is when that's the case. After futzing up various plans, there's a gathering of the New York criminal elite, including Kingpin, Tombstone, Hammerhead, Mr. Negative, and the Owl. And good golly, look at Hollingsworth's use of white on Kingpin here, where they debate the plausibility of putting a hit on Mr. Avenger himself. It's an interesting conversation, as these hardened criminals debate whether they want the heat of going after an Avenger, but it also highlights Hawkeye's standing in the Marvel Universe that you couldn't do if he wasn't somewhat vulnerable. Ultimately, the crime families are convinced to employ Kazi, the Clown, a character we see introduced in Francisco Francavilla issues filling in for Aja with his incredible use of fractured layouts, hot yellows and oranges raising tension, and various violent hits Kazi has executed, pun intended, in the past. Francavilla brings his Archie horror sensibilities to Clint and Kazi's origins, dark mirrors of closeness with their brothers, and Clint's drunk, abusive father, and both of their parents' early, untimely demises. I remember being put off by these issues when I was collecting Hawkeyes and ongoing as it came out, and rereading, I suspect a large part of that is because of how dark the narrative shift becomes when Francavilla's Kazi is explored in more detail, right? This is a character with a dark past and a dark history who enters what is otherwise can feel like hanging out with Clint and Kate comics, right, and having fun. The reality of Hawkeye, though, is it's not this flippant, too cute for its own good vanity project for Fraction and company, at least not all the time. And Kazi's assassination of Grills, this charming resident of Clint's apartment, the Grillmeister who insists Clint's codename is Hawkeye, is a real episodic gut punch, one that basically put the comic on hold for months, as the series then needed to catch its breath and avoid picking up chronologically from these broken pieces for a clean 4 issues. The final piece of character development for Clint, that it is absolutely essential to understanding the run and how this character fits into Hawkeye's legacy, is in Clint's relationship to his brother Barney Barton. When Barney comes to town, we see how he helped target Clint's bravery and stubborn anger, and how he literally trains him in the art of quarter snapping and throwing a punch. Because Clint Barton, is the most human Avenger imaginable, his family is also frequently the most ignored. Think about regular Avengers, and you have all these domineering family connections. Thor's Asgardian royalty, the legacy of Howard Stark, and of course for a time, Magneto's fatherhood with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. What Fraction and team do here with a focus on Barney is remind us of Clint's humanity. Again, not as a crutch, but as a key component of what drives this character. Now, there's no doubt that I've talked too much about Hawkeye without enough focus on Kate Bishop, the legacy Hawkeye who takes over the mantle, who simply claims it as her own and is proven right to do so, and she's just as essential to this book's success as any character. In large part, that's due to the fact that Hawkeye's first full year of Marvel Now is a lot less Kate-focused than I remembered it, although there's still definitely good stuff here. Kate's real shining moment begins with the summer's Hawkeye Annual #1 by Fraction and Javier Pulido, and then picks up at the end of the year of the comics I'm focused on with Hawkeye #14 kicking off LA Woman. This marks the official debut of Annie Wu as primary series artist alongside Fraction and Hollingsworth. There must have been tremendous temptation, but I love that Annie Wu doesn't overly try to capture Aja's style or approach to layouts. There's purposefully shared DNA, sure, but Kate in California feels like her own unique story, which again is critical. She's not just the supporting also-ran. Kate is Hawkeye. Of course, even prior to LA Woman, Kate is the heart that keeps Team Hawkeye from falling apart. Truly, point to any moment of weakness for Clint in this series, and it's always Kate who snaps him out of it and gets him back on track as a hero. Arguably, no one summarizes the Hawkeye partnership better than Kate when she says, "You and me, together? Together, Clint, I think you and me are the person we both wish we could be. And I know that person. I know that person is worth something. I know that person can pretty much do anything." Kate's move to LA finds her kicking off a career as a private detective, and in true Hawkeye fashion, it's mostly determination, frozen peas, and chutzpah that makes this reality. Kate's quickly in over her head in solving a mystery, helping a wonderfully charming gay couple, and making her own way about, making without her New York connections as she can get. She's far away from it all. We've talked about the visual idiosyncrasies of Aja, but in LA Woman, Fraction's own ticks take center stage in stranger ways. Most notably, Kate has regular run-ins with a never-named Jim Rockford, aka the private investigator from the long-running 70s Rockford Files. This grocery store Rockford is like a ghost mentor for Kate in what I still think feels like one of the most self-indulgent pieces of the run. Again, though, it's another gamble, and whether or not it works, I enjoy the creative freedom available to try. The end of Kate's first issue out west reintroduces the prominent role of Madame Mask, with Fraction, Wu, and team building a lasting antagonist for Kate as she develops out of the shadow of the Young Avengers and into her own player. It doesn't feel like an accident, either, that it's Kate, not Clint, who is tied to a more traditional, long-standing Avengers villain as her primary rival, yet again declaring that Kate Bishop, she is Hawkeye. All told, Hawkeye is one of the most influential superhero comics of the 2000s. It's certainly not the first, and there are contemporaries launching right around the same time or earlier, like Mark Waid and Marcos Martin on Daredevil, or Kelly Sue DeConnick and Team's Captain Marvel, but look at the landscape of Marvel's solo hero titles before and after Hawkeye, and there is a dramatic shift. It's the way the superior foes of Spider-Man plays with the comedy of C-list villains trying to get organized, the way Declan Shalvey reinvents Mr. Knight in the pages of Moon Knight, and the way Charles Soule and Javier Pulido are comfortable letting Jen Walters lawyer up in She-Hulk. Look around at the big two today in 2022, and books like Nightwing by Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo are clearly indebted and inspired by this work. Given that I have the work as one of my 15 favorite comics of all time, it's a bit of an undersell to say I think it's a good Marvel comic. Certainly in the context of the Marvel Now era, it's a huge part of the reason the baseline quality assessment of this period is so high. Clint and Kate may be pulling themselves out of a dumpster, with bandages covering more skin than not. But Hawkeye is pristine. Thanks everybody for listening. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You can find ways to support Comic Book Herald over at patreon.com/comicbookherald. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at, you guessed it, Comic Book Herald. Look for the best comics ever and My Marvelous Year podcast for more from me. And hey, if you want to listen to more conversations like this on the YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. All that will help me out a great deal. Thanks for listening, everybody. And as always, enjoy the comics.